I wanted to invite the elder in our community to offer a blessing for us tonight. And probably know who that is. But it's lovely being part of the elder council in our community, DJ. Unmute.
Okay. I must be the one. A blessing. Nothing is jumping into my mind, but let me give it another bit. My blessing or my wish is that we continue to pay attention to our senses and what we notice in the present moment, and be willing to stretch our awareness to go deeper into being present in the moment, and that practice radiate out into our world, that we get much more aware of where we are in our world and what we're doing.
Thank you, DJ. And I wanted to say, DJ, just how much I appreciate you as an elder in our community. I know every year we live is both a challenge and a blessing, and that those together make who we are, and that's a little bit of my Dharma talk. But as you were talking, when I was growing up, there seemed such a separation between the things I wanted and the elders in my life. Like teachers at school, who mostly were, a few of them weren't, but anyway, insisting on a particular type of conformity. And it is such a blessing to have you in our community as an elder, and how you share and bring your wisdom to us. So thank you. So greetings, Sangha. And I went through many different thoughts about the Dharma talk, and nothing seemed quite right, and it was getting later and later, and I opened this Dharma talk and that Dharma talk, and then I finally landed. It felt like the appropriate thing to do, to land on the Four Remembrances, which in the Mahayana tradition is the sort of entryway for going into practice. And I'll maybe cover 3 of them, but maybe 4 of them. And the first is appreciating the preciousness of life. And the second is considering impermanence. And the third is contemplating the law of karma. And the fourth is contemplating the unsatisfactoriness of the conditioned worldly life. And I actually love these four contemplations because in a way they come in through a different gateway to cover the field and then the overarching comprehension of the Dharma as how do we come into our practice, how do we enter, today being our first day of the self-retreat, into the understanding of why we're practicing. There is a story of the Buddha standing by the Ganges River, and he picks up a little thumbnail of sand and he lifts it up and shows the Sangha around him, and he says, do you see the sand on my thumbnail? And they say yes. And then he says, now look at all the sand you can see along the river. And is it not many, 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 many grains, uncountable grains? Difficult to count. And the Sangha said yes. And then he said, when you consider all these many, many, many uncountable grains, and then you consider the little pinch of sand on the thumbnail, that's how few sentient beings are born as human beings into life as a human being. And that makes sense when we consider how many billions of insects there are as beings, and probably countless, and then many other types of beings, and then ourselves as beings, and we are so few beings. And you also probably have heard the story of the turtle, and so that's another way to talk about how precious it is to be a human being. That there is a turtle that comes up to breathe once every 100 years, or maybe it's even 1,000, I don't know, something a long time. And there's one rubber round ring, or not rubber because it was in the Buddha's time, one round ring of something. And the likelihood of that turtle's head coming up inside the ring is as likely as it is to be born as a human being. And it really turns me around. I've heard those stories a lot, but to consider it, and it was hard for me to consider it as something particularly meaningful. I think because sometimes it feels so difficult to inhabit our life as a human being and to inhabit our lives in communities of human beings. And yet, I know that when we are close and present to someone who is dying, whether we know them or not, that deep understanding arises, doesn't it? That human life is precious. And so when I saw as a young child someone dying on the side of the road in Johannesburg, it was so, it was such a, like bringing that teaching so close up. Like, here's a human being who I don't know and who is dying. And so when we consider that, and then we consider, if we put ourselves in the place of that person dying, and also put ourselves in the place of our friends and family members who are grieving us, we get a sense of how precious our life is. And especially because each of our lives is never to be repeated, that we are so unique and contribute to life in such unique ways. And some of us called in our ancestors this morning, and that's another acknowledgement of the preciousness of each individual life. So finding the gateway into contemplating the preciousness of our life and how that becomes the ground for the possibility of opening the heart and mind. Because if we weren't human beings, that wouldn't be possible. And so in all those conditions of that turtle coming up once 100 years in a ring of these vast wide oceans that form more mass than our land base does, that's us. That's a little bit of an example of how precious we are. And so as we consider the preciousness of our life, then that becomes the condition and foundation for us to begin to take care of our life, right? Like, oh, this is my life, it's precious, and I can take care of it. And one of the beautiful ways to contemplate that we have already mentioned over and over again is that we are part of nature. And nature is so beautiful to us, you know. And so that movement, I just went out for a walk, and it's sunset, and I'd been in the house the whole day, like catching up on checks and paying bills and things, and then going outside and feeling like, wow, I am beautiful like these mountains and the sunset and the shadows and the purple and the wind and the aliveness of the bushes. I am as beautiful. And the great time master Buddhadasa, he said the same thing when a Western student came up to him and said, metta doesn't do it for me. I don't know how to access it. And he said, just go outside. There was apparently a river right by his monastery. Go sit by the river and contemplate that you are as beautiful as what you see. And that's a true reflection of yourself. And so in this self-respect, then we have the foundation for wanting to support the heart and the mind, healing and opening. I've also find the gift of my life when I contemplate having the blessing of coming to a practice, and how desperate I was when I was younger. I was suicidal as a teenager, and I know some of us have been, and many in our community are, so not so unusual. It speaks to the depth of suffering and not knowing how to hold it or understand it or to inhabit it. And I felt very close sometimes, that fine line of, was I going to live or was I going to die? And so when I think about the preciousness of life and the preciousness of coming to the Dharma, then I understand, and this also helps me to practice how I am practicing for all the people who can't, for all the people who are on the front lines working 20 hours a day, or for mothers of young children, or for soldiers who are fighting in wars, or liberation activists who are fighting for freedom, or just how difficult it is, not impossible because we know so many people are practicing in prisons, but how difficult it is. Or in hospitals. I've spent many months in hospitals, and how difficult it is to practice in hospitals. So as I contemplate the blessing of being a human being and the blessing of coming to the Dharma, and how many people haven't because of the different circumstances and conditions in their life, then that adds weight and gravitas to those blessings. Like, yeah, this for not because, just because of conditions, the blessings of conditions that have brought me here, then I can carry in some way all the people who haven't found their way yet through the contemplation of the preciousness of my life and the preciousness of coming to the Dharma. I was just looking at the watch thinking, do I have time? But I do. I'm going to read the story because it's such a beautiful story about contemplating someone supporting the preciousness of life. And it's from this book, Field Notes on the Compassionate Life by Marc Barasch. Barasch, probably Barasch, but maybe Barasch. So, Harold is a man who donated his kidney. His donation was, as he sees it, scarcely his own doing, but a case of one thing leading to another. One domino, he says, was his father's death from cancer at age 56. Harold had felt a sheer helplessness that just ripped my heart to pieces, he says, seeing this linebacker-sized man just shrink away. I remember looking at his glasses on the nightstand after he died, sobbing my eyes out, wishing I could have done something, anything. A few years later, at the mall on Valentine's Day, Harold passed an elderly couple sitting at a fold-up table with a hand-lettered sign reading, "Help us save our child." I was there to buy some pants, not hear some bring-me-down story, he says. But when I saw people whipping past them without even looking, I had to double back. The couple was searching for a matching bone marrow donor for their leukemia daughter, and Harold eagerly agreed to be tested. To his intense disappointment, a near match turned out to be a hairbreadth miss. Not long after that, he says, another domino fell. Flying cross country, he saw an in-flight movie about a high school football player who had donated a kidney to save his sick grandmother. Harold felt so moved, he jotted down the 800 number at the end of the rolling credits. Soon after, he happened upon an article about a white school teacher in North Carolina who had given a kidney to a black student using a relatively painless new laparoscopic procedure. It was a revelation. You can give away your spare and save a life. And your race doesn't even matter. How great is that? Impulsively, he resolved to become a donor. Then click-clack, another domino fell. He found out that one of the few anonymous donor programs in the country was in a nearby town. He signed up, went through a battery of tests, and after passing the medical screening was elated to get a go-ahead. His wife, he says, was not so enthused about anyone taking things out of my body. But by the time I finished explaining to her that it's ER for real, that I could be part of a medical miracle that saves someone's wife or mom, she was bawling her eyes out. Ethiopian refugee Janet Belay, wife to Sagae, mom to Messeret and Abby, had been on dialysis 3 times a week for over a decade, enduring over 40 operations to keep her alive. Her name going nowhere on the endless list of would-be kidney recipients. To Janae, an accountant, her life felt like a wall clock set at 5 minutes to midnight, the seconds ticking past. But 2 weeks before Christmas that year, she found herself being wheeled into an operating room in Falls Church, Virginia, while Harold was trundled into an OR at another hospital in the DC neighborhood of Georgetown. With the reggae music he had chosen thumping softly in the background, surgeons made a few small slits below his navel, threaded a small video camera into the incisions, inserted their retrieval instruments, and gingerly jockeyed out his kidney. It was then rushed across state lines and essentially repotted like a prize azalea. When Harold awoke from anesthesia, he was awestruck to hear a nurse say, "Your kidney's inside someone else who is peeing up a storm." 2 months later, at a banquet arranged in their honor by the Transplant Consortium, the 2 oddly intimate strangers were introduced for the first time. Their families have since become friendly, having dinners together, talking often on the phone, exchanging holiday cards and birthday presents. As we then contemplate that preciousness, then we also build on that and support it by contemplating impermanence. And even though it seems like it might be oppositional, we know actually it isn't. One of the stories that I've lives really a lot in my heart is Ruth's story, Ruth Dennison, the teacher who founded the center, when she talked about her practice at Ubakin Center in Burma and the instructions that he gave every day to the few people who were there. They were all living in their own cell in the monastery. And he worked in the government. He was head of the Department of Trade and Imports, and agriculture, so like a minister and very busy all the time. So he would get up very early in the morning and open the door of each cell and offer instructions to each of the students. And Ruth said his instructions were the same every day. He would open the door and he would say, anicca, 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 which is the Pali word for impermanence, and then close the door again. So all the instructions that were needed. And then we're also invited in this contemplation of impermanence to contemplate the vicissitudes of life. And why? Why contemplate anicca, anicca, and the vicissitudes of life? Because in the acknowledgement that everything is changing and that we can't hold on, just like the sunset that maybe you experienced, a little later because you're further north, or a little earlier, maybe a little earlier, and us here. When we allow nature to be as it is, ourselves included, then that frees up ourselves from the constriction of ownership into a relationship of seeing ourselves and understanding ourselves as precious and sacred. So there are the traditional contemplations of, that you've already heard of, acknowledging how every breath is different, how it arises and passes away. We've also mentioned our changing bodies, sick and then they're healthy, and tired and then we have energy. And the changing emotions, happy, sad, depressed, miserable, elated, jealous, generous, just the whole field of different of mental factors or emotions arising and passing. And we're also explicitly invited to acknowledge how gain and loss keeps changing in our lives, how there are moments when we find ourselves gaining things and then losing things. And it reminds me of my mother, who we had a very rocky relationship. And when maybe 3 years before she died, she said, I want to buy you a birthday present. And she knows I love cashmere sweaters. She said, I want to buy you a cashmere sweater. So she took me to this old, it wasn't like a place in a mall. It was like on the street, and there were 2 older women in the store, and all the walls were covered with these little wooden drawers. And in each of the wooden drawers they would pull out, there would be these amazing Italian design cashmere sweaters. And when I thought, it's like, Mom, absolutely not. It was like $350 for a sweater. And she said, no, I want to buy this for you. And I kept saying, are you sure? And she said, try it on. And I did. And it was truly a sensual experience. That cashmere against my skin was so silky smooth. It was amazing. It was like woolen water. It was that smooth. So she bought it for me, and I could feel her expression of love in it. 2 weeks later, I'm back in the United States, and I was meeting someone from the San Francisco Zen Center, and there's a little cafe, this is in San Francisco, right next to the Zen Center, and it was hot in the cafe. So just like this, I put the sweater on the back of my chair, And then at the end of the tea, I turned around and it had gone. And I went, of course, to the waiter and said, "Have you seen my sweater?" And he said, no. And I looked around at everyone, gone. Gain and loss, the nature of life, gain and loss, and contemplating it. And then, of course, contemplating the changes of praise and blame. How sometimes we're praised and how sometimes we're blamed. And how sometimes we praise and blame other people. Just the changing nature of samsara and life. And then the changing nature of pleasure and pain, coming and going and coming and going. So that mantra that we were invited to practice the last day of the retreat, "This is not me and this is not mine," is based on the understanding of the law of impermanence, that everything is changing and we can't hold on to anything. And so I wanted to read this it's one of my favorite poems about impermanence. So I wanted to read it. I think I just want to say the ways that as we contemplate something, anything, over and over again, how it becomes the condition for liberation. Because in reading these four invitations, I happened to come across something from the Visuddhimagga that said, if you contemplate the beautiful qualities of the Buddha throughout your days non-stop, that can become the condition for liberation. And I got, what the Buddha said about where do you rest your mind? And according to where you rest your mind, over and over again, becomes the condition for liberation. And there's a great tradition in the Thai community of contemplation as the grounds for awakening. So it isn't just noticing with bare attention the arising and passing away of pleasure and pain, or of the breath, or of other sensations. It's also possible to take and just hang out, especially because you're on a self-retreat, to hang out and contemplate the changes in your life. All these different changes. Because it conditions the mind to awaken to what we're contemplating. Okay, so here's a lovely contemplation for that. And this is called Reflections on Impermanence, Life of Chagkar, a book of teachings by the 18th century wandering Tibetan yogi. I went for some fresh air to a meadow covered with flowers, while singing and remaining in a state of awareness of the absolute view. I noticed among the profusion of flowers spread out before me, one flower waving gently on its long stem and giving out a sweet fragrance. As it swayed from side to side, I heard the song in the rustling of its petals. And I don't, this is, both in, when we're in different states of samadhi, then maybe you have experienced this too, or in other states taking in medicine of different kinds, it's possible to hear songs and music, and I know that I at different points have heard seals singing to me on Navarro Beach. It was I understood what they were saying, but it wasn't in words, but it was a song. So when I hear this, I don't think it's just symbolic. I think we actually do have experiences of hearing animals and plants singing to us. So this is what the flower says. Listen to me, mountain dweller. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but in fact, you lack awareness of impermanence and death, let alone any realization of emptiness. For those with such an awareness, outer phenomena all teach impermanence and death, and I, the flower, will now give you, the yogi, a bit of helpful advice. A flower born in a meadow, I enjoy perfect happiness with my brightly colored petals in full bloom, surrounded by an eager cloud of bees. I dance gaily, swaying gently with the wind. When a fine rain falls, my petals fold to enclose me. When the sun shines, I open like a smile. Right now I look well enough, but I won't last long, not at all. Unwelcome frost will dull the vivid colors. Turning brown, I wither. Thinking of this, I am disturbed. Later still winds, violent and merciless, will tear me apart until I turn to dust. You, hermit or practitioner, are of the same nature. Right now you look well enough, but you won't last long, not at all. Unhealthy aging will steal away your vigor, your hair will whiten and your back will grow bent. When touched by the merciless hands of illness and death, you will leave this world for the next life. Since you, mountain roaming hermit, and I, a mountain-born flower, are mountain friends, I have offered you these words of good advice. Then the flower fell silent and remained still. In reply I sang, O brilliant, exquisite flower, your discourse on impermanence is wonderful indeed. But what shall the two of us do? Is there nothing that can be done? The flower replied, among all the activities of samsara or the world, this is not one that is lasting. Whatever is born will die. Whatever is joined will fall apart. Whatever is gathered will disperse, and whatever is high will fall. Having considered this, I resolve not to become attached to these lush meadows, even now in the full glory of my display, even as my petals unfold in splendor. You too, while strong and fit, should abandon your clinging, seek the pure field of freedom and the great serenity. So, having said that, I want to acknowledge that there are times when we consider impermanence and our aging and our death, and there are times when we don't. And we don't when the mind feels ruffled or contracted or ill at ease, because clearly that's not the time to consider impermanence and our own death. That's the time to consider the preciousness of our life. But when we feel more stable and at ease, then this contemplation and consideration can open the heart and mind into places of non-attachment and non-clinging. And that's why this is considered such an important teaching. So let me check in with you, because that was just 2 of the 4. Let me check in with you about your energy, because this was your first day in practice. I could mention karma, or I could let it go and just read a poem. What's your energy like? Go on, go on. So, you might have heard me say, almost to the point of you feeling like, oh, shut up, Arinna. Appreciate your intentions, acknowledge your intentions. And that invitation is based on the law of karma. So this is, I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs of what the Buddha says, and then we'll go a little bit into it, but not a lot. So, karma is the intentional action of body, speech, and mind. It is the will that organizes the mind and body towards a goal. And in the talk on ignorance, I mentioned, and you've heard this before, that there are all these moments arising and passing according to whatever sense space is activated. And in that moment, the book also talked about it as chitta, or consciousness. There are all these factors that are in each moment of consciousness and chitta. And volition or intention is in each moment of chitta. So just to say that that capacity to consciously intend is available all the time. It is that capacity. What often happens is that it's below our awareness, and because it's below our awareness, the expression of karma, that organization, I love that. That was from Nadine Gordimer, this amazing Buddhist who wrote a book on the 52 mental factors, that volitional action wills and organizes the mind and body towards a goal. That's happening all the time. So the Buddha said, according to the seed that is sown, so is the fruit that you reap. The doer of good will gather good results. The doer of the unskillful will reap unskillful results. If you plant a good seed well, then you will enjoy the good fruit. So just like if you plant an apple seed, you won't get an orange. And if you plant a banana, you won't get a blueberry. So every intention is like a seed being planted in the stream of our consciousness. And it not only determines what the consequences will be, whether they'll be supportive of our well-being or obstacles to our well-being, but each intention conditions the mind and heart for the next moment of consciousness. And it's so beautiful, because if we were like a solid consciousness, we wouldn't be able to change because it would be solid. But because we are conditioned, that we are the expression of all these conditions arising and passing away, then it's possible for us through the law of karma, through bringing awareness to our intentions and the quality of our intentions, to condition the mind and the next moment of consciousness, to create the conditions for that. So as Thich Nhat Hanh says beautifully in his description of karma, as what kind of plant do you want to plant in your greenhouse, and what kind of and which ones do you keep watering? So it's coming back to the Dharma talk of the wholesome and unwholesome. We are, through the power of karma, watering the seeds through our intention of what's wholesome and skillful. And then in the Dhammapada, whether it was skillful or unskillful, the power of any action once performed is never lost. The results always arise accordingly. So that is to say that if we act out something that is skillful, it's never lost. As well as if we act out something unskillful, it's never lost. However, this law isn't deterministic, so that according to the conditions that flower is blossoming or that plant grows, makes a difference to the plant. So let's say, for example, we plant, let's say I say something unskillful, and then I'm in a place where I recollect that and my heart is open, and I go to the person that I said something unskillful to and said, hey, I realize I did that. I'm so sorry. The karmic consequences are different because they're rooting in that recollected mind than if I said something unskillful and then I'm like, yeah, I'm so glad I said that. They are blah, 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 blah. Then the karmic consequences are different because it's living in a negative mind state, so it intensifies and grows. So it isn't deterministic, it's dependent on the conditions. That seed is dependent on the conditions of the mind. And that is beautiful because you've all heard the story of Angulimala, right? This guy who killed 999 people. And as a part of revenge, and then he came across the Buddha, and through I'm not going to tell the whole story, but he was moved and he was ordained. So there's someone who was many unskillful acts, right? He awoke. And the consequences were that in the villages where he had murdered people, when they saw him begging, they would throw food at him. And he understood, oh, this is the consequences. And that is the difference between when your mind is totally purified, that the consequences are different than the actual action because the mind is pure. So I think I'm a testimony to that because when I was young, I was so unskillful in my life. I did so many nasty things. I should say unskillful things. I stole so much and acted out so much. And yet here I am, blessed in the Dharma. And so the negative consequences land differently than the kinds of things that I did. So that's that holds the complexity. And in fact, the Buddha said that you have to be a Buddha or fully awakened Arahant to understand the intricacies of karma. That's how non-deterministic it is. That in each life the threads are so complex, you can't say, well, I stole all that stuff when I was young, so I'm going to be poor in this lifetime. That you can't just say that it's much too complex for that. And so in that understanding then, we consider our agency over and over again. Oh, I might not be able to directly call skillful qualities into my mind and heart right now, but I can intend to. And right there, we're creating the conditions for a wholesome state to arise. And that can just be our practice. I can't do it now, may I in the future. I can't do it now, may I in the future, when the conditions are supportive of metta arising, or of concentration arising, or of mindfulness arising. And that's the heart of our agency, that recognition through mindfulness of what our mind state is, and then bringing intention, skillful intention, to organize the mind and orient it towards the wholesome and the skillful. So, it's often compared to the physical laws of the universe, that like the law of pressure and volume and heat, that in a container, when you increase heat, the pressure in the container will change. Or like the law of gravity, it's said the law of karma is always operating. I mean, actually the Buddha said there were times when it wasn't operating, but it in human beings in general, it is lawful. What happens to the mind is lawful. That's what the Buddha is saying. It's not bad luck. It's lawful. So it's very profound, isn't it? That how we understand our minds and hearts is lawful. And yeah, it's very beautiful. Let's see, maybe I'll just say, I think maybe that's enough. I'll just read a poem now. Which one do I want? This is Blessing by John O'Donoghue, Intending. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the grey window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may the flock of colours, indigo, red, green and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the curragh of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life.